described. Try to picture someone who's a bit unconventional and doesn't fit into societal norms. We all know that one person who just isn't quite right. Now imagine being that person. Your entire life, you have boundaries put around you. You have a beautiful sister who's coveted by her father, who have suitors from all over the world coming for her beauty and her grace, whereas you are commonly referred to as a shrew. And then out of nowhere, you meet someone. They match your wit and your intrigue. You like no one ever has. Even better, they're interested in you as well. They actually have a formidable opponent for you to engage in flattery or etc. So I would argue that Catherine's marriage with Petruchio actually inspired changes that we would see done by the experiment by her father. However, in the way Aaron wants you to think, really, Catherine's relationship with Petruchio was one that enjoyed and gave her the ability to prove those that doubted her wrong, to prove that she was not a shrew and that she was loved because of their matched intellect. That'll be my first argument point. My second, I'll argue that Kate enjoyed the role she had as a wife because of the games they played. Petruchio played with her as if it was a game of wit. And lastly, by playing this game and fulfilling her role as a wife, she was able to prove to everyone who had called her a shrew as evidence. I argue that although Petruchio's methods were obscene and cannot be forgiven, he did provide Catherine the relationship she desired as a means to change through her own volition. This shows individuals possess that ability, given the proper cultivation surrounding them. Now to my first point, I wanted to argue that, as we all know and are aware of, gender roles in the 16th century are quite different than they are now. I'm in no way defending Petruchio or trying to make him a relic for feminism. However, we have described that women were in need of men at that time. Women were seen as possessions. They were not able to hold money. That, therefore, even as Aaron argued, Petruchio, maybe one of his arguments was for money for Catherine. Catherine would have had no money once her father passed away. All of the money would have gone to Bianca and her suitor. Therefore, Petruchio provided Catherine with a comfortable life and a husband, even though some of his boundaries that he set, much like her father's in her younger life, were quite intrusive and obscene. But I do think, as I described earlier, Kate is not so much as a shrew as a witty person who Petruchio matched with. Their banter was one of the features I think that most attracted Kate to Petruchio. If I could bring a quote from the text, I believe it's scene 2, act 1. This is just an example of their quick banter within one another. You could assume this in a bar today, maybe. Different terms, quite likely, but a little bit of negging, as the young kids say. Kate begins, "I for a turtle as he takes a blizzard. Petruchio, come, you wasp, by faith you are too angry. Kate, if I be waspus, best be aware my sting. Petruchio, my remedy then is to pluck it out. Kate, I, if the fool could find where it lies." So as you can see, there's a banter and a dialogue that they evidently enjoy each other. And as I expressed earlier, without Petruchio's guidance, Kate would be without children in the future, without a husband in the future, without providing. So moving on to my second point, Petruchio may have enjoyed the wealth that came with marrying Kate, but as I mentioned earlier, without Petruchio, Kate would have not had that wealth and would have needed him to depend on it. Given the values of the time period, I would imagine a husband is an important person to possess. And speaking of possessions, as I mentioned earlier, women were often seen as possessions during this time period. But as she mentions after their turmoil, Kate receives a great deal of pleasure from serving her lord, as you mentioned earlier, I believe. This is evidence in scene 5, act 2, if you'll forgive me for once again going to the book. When Petruchio offers the challenge to his friends at Catherine's wedding, Catherine and Bianca's father's wedding, after the wedding, he challenges his two friends that says, my wife will come first to show her submissiveness. To quote it, as I said, scene 5, act 2, "Thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign, one that cares for thee, and for the maintenance commits his body." So as you can see, and I believe this is in Kate's final speech, that she obviously is the most subordinate, as she reacted first to the three friends, the bet of when they called their wife. But then again, in her final speech after she came to them, she admitted that she enjoyed this type of marriage and that this was a benefit to her. My third point that I'd like to make was that Kate was far from submissive in the beginning, as we both mentioned. And I think the word mirroring is something that we could explore in this section as well. I believe her shrewdness in the beginning was mirrored by Petruchio's treatment of her and his taming of her, and I believe that's something that is really interesting and curious to dissect. Was his going after her behaviors important to her development as a human being, allowing Kate to change in a proper way? Yes, we're not arguing that they're a bit aggressive, waking her up in the middle of the night, not letting her eat, potentially more aggressive sexual situations. But that being said, in the end, Kate seemed to be a respectful wife who seemed to be more motivated to please her husband. Although their teamwork may have been unconventional, Petruchio filled a void for Catherine. They fostered fundamental change in her behavior, and Catherine and Petruchio may have been atypical partners, but they were partners nonetheless.
So my question for you is that when Kate and Petruchio are first introduced to each other, it is more or less stated that they are intellectual equals. And Petruchio also notes that he will not be easily dominated by her. It could be argued that Kate was intrigued by this man and found him more exciting than the other men that she had been around. Do you believe that this provides some rationality as to why Kate stayed with him? And if so, do you believe that Kate was really beaten down by her husband, or did she see it more of like a game?
Yeah, so I definitely agree that at their first meeting, it's obvious that Kate and Petruchio seemed to have a sort of banter of matched wits, that no matter what Kate said to drive off Petruchio, he refused and insisted that she was the most wondrous and amiable company to be around. But that's the point. His first strategy, it seemed, to woo Kate was to actually woo her, to get him to marry her, to get her to marry him. So one of his quotes from the beginning of that scene when they first met, it says, "Take this of me, Kate, of my consolation. Hearing thy mildness praised in every town, thy virtue spoke of and thy beauty sounded, yet not so deeply as to thee belongs." So basically, in this quote, he's saying, I've heard your personality praised everywhere, obviously not, and your goodness and beauty compliment it, yet still you're even better than what everybody says. This is obviously a very complimentary quote. And I believe Kate was surprised by his persistence and quick comebacks. She even struck him, and yet Petruchio stayed and insisted they marry. So when Petruchio announced to her father that the proposal was set and that they were to be married on Sunday, she didn't refuse because she was intrigued and perhaps a bit taken with Petruchio's compliments. I mean, he complimented her a lot, and they had good banter. So Petruchio did, after all, promise a fine wedding with a feast, lots of guests, and new clothing for the day. His quote says, "Give me thy hand, Kate. I will unto Venice to buy apparel against the wedding day. Provide the feast, father, and bid the guest. I will be sure my Catherine will be fine." So he's saying, marry me, Kate. I'll plan a great wedding with a feast, and I'll invite everybody, and you'll be wearing only the finest on our wedding day. So sounds like a great celebration, a great ceremony to be part of. It sounds pretty promising. But then this is where it changes, where Petruchio, he gets what he wants, finally. He gets Catherine's hand in marriage. And so come Sunday, it seems Petruchio has taken a new approach in order to tame Catherine. He shows up to the wedding day late in ridiculous clothing. He takes her away from the ceremony against her protest early. He refuses to let her eat or sleep and contradicts everything she says. Petruchio's personality has taken a 180 since his proposal, and Kate is no longer a willing subject. This is not the marriage she met, first of all, before she married him. This relationship had potential at first. Petruchio and Kate did have matched wits, and Kate was indeed intrigued and not totally against the idea of such a marriage. But as soon as Petruchio got what he wanted from Baptista, he turned sinister and took all the freedom from Kate in order to tame her and make her an obedient wife, what he felt he could live with. Petruchio manipulated Kate into marrying him by offering someone she could finally connect with, and then promptly stole her free will and broke her spirit. So at the beginning, like I said, this might have been a good wedding, might have been a happy relationship. Mm-hmm. But then it is seen, Petruchio's true colors are revealed after the wedding day, that he is just trying to manipulate her and make her into an obedient wife and not actually have a loving mutual relationship.